Broadcasting from New York City to the world, it's the G-Man Interviews.
Welcome. Dr. Stephen Morse is Professor of Epidemiology at the Columbia University Mailman School of Public Health. His interests focus on improving disease early warning systems and emerging infectious diseases. He was concurrently Global Co-Director of PREDICT, a USAID project to strengthen global capacity for surveillance and detection of new infectious disease threats from 2009 to 2014. Dr. Morse was previously a virology faculty member in the Rockefeller University and program manager for Biodefense at the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, also known as DARPA. At DARPA, he co-directed the Pathogen Countermeasures program and subsequently directed the Advanced Diagnostics program. He is the editor of 2 books, Emerging Viruses, which was selected by American scientists as one of the top 100 science books in the 20th century, and The Evolutionary Biology of Viruses. He was a founding section editor of the CDC journal Emerging Infectious Diseases, former editor-in-chief of the Pasteur Institute's Virology Journal, and is currently on the editorial board of several journals, including Health Security and Viral Immunology. Dr. Morse was chair of the NIH Conference on Emerging Viruses, for which he originated the concept of emerging viruses/infections. In 2015, Dr. Morse was appointed to the U.S. government's National Science Advisory Board for Biosecurity. He received his Ph.D. in microbiology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Thank you very much for joining me, Dr. Morse.
Glad to be with you.
The Zika virus. What is it, and where did it originate?
Zika was actually first discovered in Uganda by a project called the Rockefeller Foundation Virus Project, which was looking for viruses carried by mosquitoes especially, or other types of biting flies or ticks. And they happened to find it in a monkey in Uganda in 1957, and then it was not known to cause human disease, but a few years later human cases were found. Since then it's spread from Africa to first, in the last few years, Polynesia and Micronesia, and then from there to the Caribbean and a number of parts of South America, including notably Brazil.
Is it related to a past or present virus?
We've known about it, obviously for, something like 50 years, although it's just been another curiosity until some human cases occurred. And then it's been doing what many of these viruses do, as people move, as opportunities occur for the mosquitoes also to be transported, the viruses themselves will move into new areas. And they'll follow trade routes, and generally, as they have in the past, and now, of course, routes of travel and tourism as well as trade. So it's not a great leap from parts of Africa to the Pacific, for example, and then from there people coming to Brazil probably introduced it there a couple of years ago. It's a virus that is in the family we call the flaviviruses. That's from the Latin word for yellow, because yellow fever, the most notorious of the viruses in the family, was the first one we knew about. And in fact, yellow fever, another very widespread tropical fever called dengue, which is in virtually every tropical area in the world and very common, and yellow fever, as I mentioned, and Zika, and chikungunya, and for that matter West Nile, although it uses different mosquitoes, are all in the same family. Yellow fever, dengue, chikungunya, which we'd been hearing about in a similar situation, spreading in the Caribbean in the last couple of years, and now Zika, which has been spreading very rapidly, are all carried by basically the same mosquito, which is called Aedes aegypti. It came over actually from Africa with the slave trade, very sad legacy of a very tragic event or period, and so did yellow fever and a number of the infections. But this particular mosquito is found in most of the tropics and has caused an untold amount of trouble simply because it generally is a very efficient transmitter of many infections, like the ones I named particularly. It tends to hang around near people, and it likes to bite people. And it number of places it's been under control, but people forget after the mosquito population comes down that it's still there, and then we see problems like this. Zika has really exploded. It has almost doubled its territory since coming to Brazil probably in the last year or so, and in the last few months it's doubled its territory. It's now over much of the Caribbean, virtually all of it.
Has it already surpassed bird flu in terms of the number of people infected?
Yes, very likely it has. We don't know how many people are actually infected because most of the cases are not really very obvious or very serious. So when it first appeared in Brazil, even the government thought that it was really not a serious problem. It was thought of as being a fairly mild disease, not pleasant, of course. You'd get a fever, a rash, maybe you would have bloodshot eyes, and some other symptoms, a headache, but generally it was thought of as being fairly mild and people got over it. As a matter of fact, chikungunya, a related virus that causes a lot of joint pain, had actually been circulating earlier, and there were some people who probably thought, thank goodness, Zika's now seems to have replaced it in the sense that it's now become prominent, and at first they thought it wouldn't be a problem, that it would just cause mild disease as we'd usually seen, and then it was a big surprise that we found so many people infected with obviously so many unexpected severe effects. For example, developmental abnormalities in infants or in fetuses developing. But I would say we just don't know how many people are really infected because most of them don't show any symptoms, and many of them are not sick enough to really know what they have or to seek medical attention. So we're only hearing about the severe cases. So I would guess there are, many more thousands, and people have made estimates of hundreds of thousands, although I don't know because we really don't have the information.
You're not going to believe this, Dr. Morse, but I just received a breaking news alert on my cell phone that I think you'll find very interesting. According to the Reuters news agency, the World Health Organization has indicated that it believes as many as 3 to 4 million people could be infected in the Americas.
Yes, that's based on two things. First of all, obviously this is a virus that is new to this area, and in general, it wasn't even recognized and known to exist until 1957, and then there were a few human cases in the 60s in Africa, but it's obviously moved quite a lot since then. So it's new to this area, which means the people who may get infected are generally going to be susceptible to it. They have no immune response because they have never been exposed to it, so they don't have any immunity to it. Secondly, based on the rapidity with which it's spread, those estimates obviously suggest that it may continue to do that because none of us, really have any immunity to it. So there are a lot of susceptible populations. The basis for the estimate then, additionally, where would you find it, is based on where you find the mosquito that can transmit it, Aedes aegypti, and there's a second species of mosquito, the so-called Asian tiger mosquito, Aedes albopictus, which is actually found much more widely, including as far north in the United States as Chicago and, even many parts of the U.S. And we're still watching to see if that's an efficient transmitter, an efficient vector for this infection? If so, then obviously there's a lot more a possibility for infection occurring in a natural cycle in the United States as well. If it's just Aedes aegypti, then it would be the southern U.S., the Gulf area where that mosquito still exists, and the places we're seeing it now all over essentially the Caribbean and South America, we assume will continue to advance. So that's a projection based on the way it's already been spreading and where the mosquitoes are known to exist that are capable of transmitting it.
In most news reports, in America and abroad, babies are being infected at an alarming rate. The rate of infection for adults isn't nearly as high. Is this largely due to the fact that a baby's immune system isn't strong enough to fend off the virus, or is it something completely different?
Well, what's really called our attention to this, is the congenital abnormalities, which occur when pregnant women become infected, and then, obviously this seems to affect the development of the skull and the brain in the developing fetus. So that's really what, made it particularly worrisome, because that's a very serious problem, that can not only be life-threatening, there have been some deaths, but obviously, has a tremendous effect on the child's development and will greatly impair cognitive development. We don't know very much about how it behaves in different age groups. Based on dengue, for example, dengue is related, but it's a distinct disease. Children may be more likely to get some of the more severe effects, but with other viruses, sometimes they get milder infections. So I don't think we really know enough about this in terms of the younger age groups, but all of them, children, of course, don't have any pre-existing immunity to it. And of course, adults also, are in the same boat because it's new to the area. In this case, the severity we see is not so much in the children versus the adults, except those who are elderly are probably more likely to have severe disease. But what happens during the development of the infant in the pregnant woman who's infected?
Most news reports are focusing on the virus's impact on humans. Should pet owners be equally concerned?
We really don't know very much about what other species it might infect in the environment. As far as we know, the only way to get it is through a mosquito bite, although there is one report of getting it through blood transfusions, and two reports, one well documented, of getting it through sexual transmission after a man has had it and may think he's recovered, but may be carrying it for a little while. But there's a lot we still don't know, and I think we're going to begin to learn, but first, I think we still don't fully understand how what it's doing in humans and how many people have been infected.
On January 27, an article by Laurie Garrett, Senior Fellow for Global Health with the Council of Foreign Relations, was published in the Huffington Post. A portion of the article, entitled "The Zika Virus Could Take a Huge Toll in the Americas," stated the following: "There is little immediate concern that the virus will spread across the U.S. because mosquitoes are dormant during winter, and this year's winter weather has been harsh, even in the southernmost parts of the continental U.S. However, as temperatures rise and spring rains create potential breeding sites, there is genuine cause for concern." Do you agree with your CFR colleagues' assessment?
It's a pretty safe statement to say that in places where the mosquito exists, Aedes aegypti in the Gulf Coast essentially, along southern U.S., it's something to be very watchful for. We will see imported cases in the U.S., and they probably, will not transmit very far. It is possible that in the Gulf Coast states, Louisiana, Texas, and Florida, and the others, we may see some transmission because the mosquito is there. I think when it gets warmer, obviously, I hope that and expect that a lot of the health agencies and the environmental agencies there will be carrying out very aggressive, very complete mosquito control programs, because that's really the most important thing. Many of these places that are now suffering from Zika had good mosquito control programs that had been really good 40 or 50 years ago, but have really just been forgotten. They became victims of their own success. So I think that places that have these mosquitoes in the U.S., and there are a few in the South, are at risk. We don't know what's going to happen, but hopefully that can be dealt with by mosquito control and by obviously educating people, as is being done right now, how to avoid mosquitoes, how to avoid mosquito bites. Make sure that you have good screens, that you use mosquito repellent, and so on. In other parts of the country, when the mosquitoes come back and become active again with biting humans, it's a question of whether that other related species of mosquito, the tiger mosquito, Aedes albopictus, is also able to transmit the infection efficiently. If it could, or relatively efficiently, if it could, then that would obviously call for very strong mosquito control measures and good public education about protecting yourself from mosquito bites, very much as with West Nile, although that was different mosquitoes. I think the principles are very much the same. What was done in New York City, for example, to control the mosquito population here, the same is generally, what you would do in most places if you thought you were going to have a problem. New York City, for example, and New York and New Jersey and many other states are doing this anyway because of West Nile. So it would probably just mean intensifying efforts and a little bit and making sure that people were educated. I'm hoping we will be able to head it off.
To date, how many fatalities have been linked to the virus, and do you suspect there'll be more?
Well, obviously we still have a lot to learn. Past experience certainly suggests that there have been very few, and in fact, I'm not even aware of recorded deaths in healthy adults. However, nobody expected the effects on unborn children, and there may be other things to learn. So we can't be complacent about this. And besides, there are a lot of serious infections like dengue that are well known and that are also transmitted by the same mosquitoes. So I think that there is a solution that will help not only with Zika but with many other well-recognized diseases that we are already worried about, like dengue. And of course yellow fever, although we have a vaccine, which has helped quite a bit. But it does seem, as if we're still living in the days when yellow fever and all these other mosquito-transmitted diseases transmitted by the same mosquito, the old days of Walter Reed and so on. We've only made some progress there. So I think it's important to watch carefully. Right now, the evidence seems to be that it's still a fairly mild disease in most people, but and certainly in healthy adults, but we don't know enough, so I think we have to watch it very carefully.
You mentioned that mosquito control efforts are underway to try and contain the situation. Are special pesticides being used as part of that effort?
Originally, DDT was very widely used, and it was successful for quite a while. The mosquitoes eventually developed resistance, and then there were good environmental reasons for going away from DDT. But there is still pesticide that can be used that's safer to use for indoor spraying. But they're not the only way now. We can try to do what we call source reduction, which is basically trying to remove standing water in which puddles of water as well as various irrigation systems to protect them from mosquitoes breeding there, because these mosquitoes like to breed in water. And that's something that people can do to help protect themselves. We saw this with West Nile as well in the U.S. by looking in their own areas, looking for places where there might be pools of water and trying to either pour the water out, drain it, or sometimes they used to put oil. Now they have more modern ways of doing that, and that's the other method. As is done in New York City, you can put a bacterial toxin that is harmless to people but does actually kill the larvae. And it's called larviciding, and it's pretty safe. In fact, it's quite safe for us, for our pets, but obviously put in the right place, it will keep the mosquito populations down considerably.
Given the rapid rate of infections in various countries, do you believe we're on the verge of a pandemic?
I think it depends on how you define a pandemic. It wouldn't be a pandemic in sort of the quick and lethal type that we think about, but obviously it already has spread widely, and it could still spread to other areas where this mosquito is well established. So you wouldn't want that. You'd want to prevent that from happening by, first by controlling the mosquitoes, and then obviously by being watchful. I don't think that restricting travel and trade is generally helpful, but certainly restricting the mosquitoes is. And I think like dengue, that would be a very similar parallel. But dengue has spread all over the world. Hopefully we can stop this one before it does.
Is there anything you'd like to say in closing, sir?
I think that it's interesting that we've never predicted any of these infections before they've suddenly come up to surprise us. Mosquito control programs and these other public health efforts, really become at times victims of their own success, because there was a lot of effort to successfully reduce. You can't eliminate. It's a very hardy mosquito, and I don't think we can completely eliminate it. And we don't even know whether that's ecologically wise, but we certainly want to reduce it to the point that, we're rarely coming in contact with these Aedes mosquitoes. And in the past, there was a considerable success in doing that, and then people sort of got complacent about it because it was successful, so they moved on to other things. And the result is the mosquitoes were still there, and the population was able to bounce back, and now we can see, these problems occurring. The mosquitoes are there, and of course with more travel and trade around the world, the possibility for the microbes to hitch a ride also is greater, I think, than ever before. So we do need to be watchful, and we should not be complacent. And thank you for the great question.
Thank you very much for taking the time to share this crucial information, Dr. Morse. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure.
I'm the G-Man, and until next time, stay cool, stay safe, and stay informed.